Welcome back, everyone, to Unboxing Logistics. I'm Lori Boyer, and I am your host, and I am super excited today to have a really interesting guest with me. Kevin Gaul from RF Smart is going to be talking to us about warehouses and automation and all the cool and not so cool things that happen in warehouses. And today I am really, really excited for us to learn all about how we can make our warehouses be just a little bit better. So Kevin, introduce yourself. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Glad to be here. I am Kevin Gaul, and I'm responsible for our product strategy and management of our shipping solutions here at RF Smart.
Yeah, tell me about RF Smart.
Yeah, Lori, so RF Smart is an over 40-year-old privately held debt-free company. We've been in the space a long time solving supply chain challenges for customers in the ERP space. So we've got thousands of customers worldwide. And again, traditionally we focused on warehouse management, automation, printing, and things like that. More recently, we've gotten into the shipping space, and that has been my entire lifeblood since we've been here. And I'm super excited to say that we've got hundreds of delighted customers, and we are excited, and we're here to stay.
Yeah. Welcome to the shipping industry. I love it. So glad to have you guys on this side. Before we even get started, one of the things that's really important to us, we're going to do a couple of things here. First, it's really, really critical for our audience that they come away from this podcast episode knowing exactly one or two things that they can or should implement, or if there was only one or two like hot takes that you wanted them to come away with remembering. What are those? So first I'm going to ask you what those hot takes are, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions just to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. So hot take number one for me, Lori, is evacuate your ivory tower and send in the demolition crew.
Okay, yeah, wow.
All too often I see the approach to shipping automation projects or many other things in the warehouse are done from offices, from conference rooms, from up on high, and yes, that's one of the cardinal sins of product management, but it's certainly one of the cardinal sins of warehouse management too. So the moral of the story here is get out, spend time on the floor, and this can be really approachable for anybody, no matter what your role is. Now, these times should scale accordingly, but make yourself a simple goal. Spend 60 minutes a day on the warehouse floor, interact with 3 to 5 people a day and ask them what they're doing and how things are going. Pro tip, I used to love to do walking one-on-ones with my teammates. So we do every one of our, maybe 1 out of 4 one-on-ones, we'd go out there and we'd walk the warehouse floor together. And so that gave us some shared time out there with the people who are doing the work.
Okay, I love that so much. And I want to say as well, just to build on that, even if you don't have a warehouse yourself, it is so cool to meet up with, your shippers and ask for people that, let's say you're using a 3PL or something, get out there, see what it's like, understand what warehouses are like. I have gone on multiple warehouse tours myself, even though I'm not down on the floor or working in warehouses day to day. And every time I learn something, it blows my mind. I remember and be like, whoa, this is why it's so difficult. So love that. Okay, hot take number 2.
Hot take number 2 is to promote your delivery experience to being a first-class citizen. For years and years, I think we've all lived through a world where your delivery experience and those links to your supply chain were just a cost to manage. And those days are dead and gone. I see this again all too often. Companies ignore this. So work backwards. Begin with your end in mind. Wiser man than me once said that. And so think about the experience that you want your customers to have, and then implement your carrier network, implement your software, implement your automation, your process, your people, your delivery network for that matter, around what you want that end experience to be. So I read a study recently in a scholarly journal, and it quoted something like 30% of an e-commerce customer's desire to repurchase from your brand is purely dictated by your on-time delivery. Yeah. Another study I read recently was something like 37 and 39% respectively of Gen Z and millennials will actually make a purchasing decision based on the environmental impacts of the delivery experience they have with your brand. So again, it's not simply a cost-cutting measure anymore. So, take it seriously and design things accordingly.
I love that idea of working from what you imagine as your dream delivery experience, and then going back and figuring out what tools you need. Just before we were even on air here, we were chatting about tech stacks and what you need and what you don't need. And I think that that's so critical in thinking through your warehouse and what you do need and maybe where you don't need something. So starting with the end in mind, I love that. Okay, hot take number 3, Kevin.
Yeah, Lori. So humans have amazingly short memories, right? Myself included. So remember the lessons that you've learned during COVID. Now, I'm not going to say that we're going to have another global pandemic during our lifetime. I certainly hope not. But, you know, remember the pain that you experienced when your elected carrier decided to hike your rates or when they decided to not pick up your volume. And all this was done under the guise of capacity constraints or revenue initiatives, which is my personal favorite moniker. Now, I'm not a spend consultant, so I'm not going to tell you that the answer to all your problems or the number of carriers you should have is more. But I will say that you should design your carrier network in a way that does keep your delivery promise in mind, in a way that makes sense for you. And the right number is seldom ever one.
Yeah.
So if you are comfortable with that, then great. Use the data at your fingertips and go out and negotiate some contracts. If that's not your forte, that's fine too. There is an entire ecosystem of these consultants out there that have been doing the same thing for a long time, and they're very, very good at it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, just diversify. I mean, that's great for risk management, but also exactly what you said. You know, we got to learn from our mistakes and from situations that occur and not forget, you know, what did happen and how we can run into trouble when we have all our eggs in one basket. So great point. We're going to get back into that, and we're going to dive into all about warehouses, automation, what the past was like, what's going on now, what we see in the future, what you guys out there should be taking advantage of, what maybe you don't need to. But first, I just want to get to know you a little bit better. So I always like to ask people a couple of questions. So my first question for you is simply this. What is your go-to comfort food?
Oh, pizza.
Pizza?
Yeah, every day of the week, twice on Sunday if I can. No, I don't get away with that. But yeah, it's pizza.
Oh, I love pizza. Do you like to order out? Do you like to make your own? Are you one of those guys with the fancy pizza oven?
So I haven't graduated to the fancy pizza oven yet. So I also read recently that people reach a certain age of life where they identify themselves completely based on like, you know, the shade of their New Balance shoes or maybe the grill they own or maybe their pizza oven. I fully intend to get there, but I haven't got there yet. So I'm all in on any of the above. Certainly order out, go out to eat pizza. I do love making it at home too. That's a lot of fun. You know, being from the Northeast originally, I definitely have a soft spot in my heart for good pizza.
Are you like a deep dish or a thin crust? What or all?
Yes.
You're an equal opportunity pizzaist.
I'm an equal opportunity pizza enthusiast, except pineapple. Pineapple doesn't deserve an opportunity.
I love pineapple. Oh, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
And cut. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, question number 2, and maybe this ties back into it. But if time and money were no object, what hobby would you love to get into?
I'd make shipping software.
You would? I love that. So your job is your hobby.
Yeah. No, in all seriousness, I would probably do something around coaching or teaching. I just really, I have a lot of passion around helping, you know, people do better with themselves. And I think education is something that, you know, we can do better at in this country. And I'd love to, you know, be a part of that, whether it be through, you know, using sports as a vehicle to help young people grow or using education as that vehicle. I'd probably do one of those two things because I'm pretty sure that if I took any of my other hobbies that seriously, my wife might divorce me.
Yeah. I had a guest once say that their dream job, if they won the lottery and everything, would be to coach like 7th grade basketball. So, hey.
Having a 7th grader, I don't know that I could sign up for 7th grade specifically, but maybe.
I know. I thought that person was a saint. They were ready to go. I've been through 7th graders. So, okay, awesome. Let's jump back into talking a little bit warehouse automation. Okay, I'm the super big history nerd. And that would probably be my passion. I'd like just somehow visit every historical site and learn everything about them. But anciently, Egypt, Rome, they all had warehouse automation, which is so cool to me. They had, in ancient Egypt, they had these granaries where they had systems that they used to automate their inventory, basically, of the grain. And in Rome, they had these really cool warehouses where they built the ground up higher so they'd get the right kind of ventilation in there and it would keep their stuff better. So obviously, warehouses, automation have been around for thousands of years. But it's only been in recent years that we've really kind of seen some huge strides in terms of mind-blowing. As all of you know, if you've been at any of the conferences or shows, they've all cool robotics everywhere. And so I would love to hear from you. Maybe paint a picture of what kind of life looked like if you were the ghost of warehouse pasts. What were warehouses like 10, 20 years ago?
That's a tough question, but I'll do my best because there was still a lot of technology available even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But, if we look at some other things, since I know you're a huge history buff.
Uh-huh.
So we were launching objects into space with rockets in the late 50s.
Yeah.
Right? But here we are in 2024, and I don't know about you, Lori. I haven't left the troposphere lately. So not all of that technology makes its way to the average person, the average warehouse. So I'll try to talk about what's probably more the norm for people 10 years ago.
Okay.
Which is really rigid on-prem systems, big efforts towards change management, or they were forced to deal with software that kind of barely got them by. You would see a lot of carrier freeware out there in the multiverse of people that were doing things, and it was just kind of painful. So I have a story from my own past that was actually kind of painful, and this was, again, really a more advanced kind of enterprise. But
yeah, and because you worked in large enterprise type sizes, so large enterprise size, but still problematic.
So some of these pains. So we actually got to a point where there was enough volume to justify what's called a zone skip, oddly enough, to Utah.
Oh.
And so our shipping building itself was probably 200,000+ square feet.
Okay.
Lots of conveyor, many miles of conveyor in the whole building. But interestingly enough, making the software match up with the hardware, you had to build this whole new divert off of our conveyor. You had to implement all these crazy complicated routing tables that, cross your fingers, you don't make a mistake because it'll be an expensive one. And so you still had to implement all these changes in order to do something as simple as implement a zone skip. And so that's quite a bit different than what we have to, the tools we have available to us today.
Right.
And so, one of the craziest things I saw, I don't know that I can answer the entirety of your question because of confidentiality reasons.
Yes.
And I've seen some pretty crazy things, but I've seen it all. I've seen people make nests and pallet racks. I've seen, wildlife make its way into buildings. I've seen people going live on cell phones from order pickers. I've seen, people get creative with access to, order management systems and things like that, shipping products to themselves. So, people are very creative.
Okay, so that kind of takes me back to your hot take number 1, which is to get out of the ivory tower and get down onto the floor of your warehouse. I have a question about that. Like, how often do you recommend, so let's say you are up in the ivory tower, you're busy, how often do you recommend people get down and are physically there on the floor in the warehouse?
So in lean theory or ideology, there's something called leader standard work. And so I'm not saying you have to go full lean on your operation necessarily, but some of them have prescribed percentages, and I don't know that you'd want to be that rigid, but someone like a first line supervisor, that person should spend pretty much their entire day on the floor.
Okay.
I'm not saying they shouldn't have an office.
Looking for nests, apparently.
Looking for nests, yeah, right. And process deviations and opportunities. But even someone who's, head of supply chain for a medium-sized organization, they should spend time, if they can, on the warehouse, daily.
It's the if they can that is always tricky.
That is the tricky part.
It is tricky, but carving that out. So absolutely. So, 10 years ago or so, things were there, but they were just not quite as, I guess, how would you describe it? How is it different from today, 10, 20 years ago? What are the biggest advances you've seen?
Yeah, so rigidity is probably the biggest thing I would call out. So again, the big shift for us, especially in the software space, is the difference between old software that had to live on servers on site and modern cloud-based software where you can do things like, continuous implementation and continuous delivery. So in between the time that we've started talking and now, we could have deployed a change to a customer if we needed to. Those days didn't really exist, at least not for the majority of people in the past. Certainly not for the mid-market that was using software, arguably made for free. Or even the larger enterprises using software where you basically had to get everyone to agree to go to DEFCON 1 before you could deploy a change. So, those things are very, very different, especially, again, modern cloud software. You get to take advantage of all the latest releases that your software provider is investing in. And the word upgrade, thankfully, is dead. I'm pleased to report, or at least should be.
So that also kind of reminds me of your hot take number 2. From what I'm hearing you say, things have sped up a lot. Like the processes to go through things aren't so rigid. It's not so long. We can pivot and react really quickly. But on the flip side, I feel like our customers are kind of, our expectations from our customers have followed suit.
They have.
And so I guess that brings me back to your point number 2 about starting at the end and looking at that customer experience. I don't know. Do you have any examples or stories or anything you want to share around the customer experience and how you've experienced that evolution?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, once upon a time, again, if you wanted to implement a change to the way your customer would receive a package, you needed to have someone from IT go in and make all these crazy changes and hope they got it right. Today, if you want to make a change to say this one customer seems to be having trouble with their deliveries and you want to add some sort of business logic to say that they need to sign for their package, you're single digit minutes away from doing that. And you don't need an IT team to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Your operations leaders, people closer to the ground level and the problem are more empowered to make those changes.
So what do you feel like, especially, I'm going to ask for now as well, but also in the past, what were kind of the biggest roadblocks and barriers to people wanting to implement automation or new technology? What was it that kind of kept them from taking those steps?
So yeah, I'll talk about some of that, but I also feel like we need to marvel at some of that software for a minute. So these I mean, I'm being serious. These systems were massive monoliths. And like I said, they needed on-prem software. They needed incredibly intelligent people to manage them. The people developing the software needed to use fixed position with languages. These were, this was very difficult to manage. But the most important thing was you had to get it right the first time. So again, there was no chance to give it a try and see how things go. It was all this big bang. And so you had to do this and you had to get it right the first time. And humans are nearly incapable of getting it right the first time.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Back to the space analogy, right? Look at our list of Apollo missions.
Uh-huh.
It takes time to get things right. And so thinking that you're going to get it right the first time is
madness.
It's madness.
It is. And I guess that's something then that you should build in is the expectation as you're implementing new softwares or as you're putting in new processes, new automation, that there may be iterations or, what do you recommend for people how do they manage that?
Yeah, so I always like to say crawl, walk, run. That's, I certainly didn't invent that. But one of the reasons why you do that is because all too often you'll find customers who are trying to automate a process that is poorly documented, maybe not documented, or worse, a process that doesn't exist. And so in order to discover that, sometimes you do need to crawl first.
Yes.
And so again, the buyer persona is very different than the person who's managing the shipments. And so, the person signing the check may not be aware of all the small nuances that the person in the corner of the warehouse who is, doing things based on a series of either, institutional knowledge that lives in his or her brain, or as one of our QAs on our team very aptly put it, a series of Post-it notes and decaying whiteboard instructions. It's tough to automate things like that when they're not clearly defined.
Yeah, and I love you pointing out documentation. I think my husband is a programmer. He works in the manufacturing field as well, actually. And so he works at large facilities, and documentation is kind of the bane of his existence, but also like what he relies on, he's like, oh, I finished all this, but I got to do all this documentation. And it's always kind of this pain. And yet if the documentation's not there, when he's going to do something from someone else, it's a big problem. And so I think sometimes that idea of trying to run before you've crawled and before you've walked, you may lose out on, it's that speed issue that you're like, oh, I'll just keep going. And you miss out on some of those critical steps. So I think that's really smart. Okay, one thing I love about you is that you have been in automation for a while. So you got all the best stories. So do you have any stories that you can share about a particularly memorable project or anything that you had happen with automation?
I do. So a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away when I was a younger man, a couple pounds lighter too. So imagine this. I was just finishing up the end of college, right? Okay. Just finished up my internship. I was working in global trading customs. And so the end of this comes and I get offered a full-time role coordinating all of the global exports for this very large company. And so I show up for my very first day of work, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and dressed wildly inappropriate.
Fresh out of college.
Dressed wildly inappropriate for the occasion. I had dress shoes on. I had a button-up shirt. Everyone looked at me like I was lost when I showed up, which was fine, So I sit down with this nice young lady who's there to train me how to do my new job, and she sits me down in front of a green screen. Now, Lori, I'm not that young, but I'm also not that old. And so I'm proceeding to listen to this person train me on the ins and outs of using this system. And I swear to you, Lori, up until the moment that she goes deep down a rabbit hole of pro tips telling me how I should master the 10 key and wear the finish off my F5 key, I thought she was trolling the new guy. So it was crazy. But I'm not smarter and certainly not more clever than any of these people were. But I had one thing going for me, which was I just had fresh eyes, like we say in the the lean space. And so I saw this and I said, there has got to be a better way of doing this. So I go home and I dream up my dreams as a, young professional, and I come back and I share this brilliant scheme to fix all these problems, at which point I was promptly reminded that the very stressed internal IT team has absolutely no time for your harebrained ideas. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So at that point, I discovered that the only tool available to me, other than, begging for permissions or cost of applications I was never going to get my hands on, was this thing called VBA, which is Visual Basic for Applications, which is just a fancy way of basically writing code that produces Excel macros. And so I went to work reading internet forums and watching YouTube videos.
That's the modern way of studying.
Yeah, that's the modern way of studying.
Say.
So I would do this, and I would sneak actually this Excel workbook home. So hopefully no one rats me out for that. But I would sneak this Excel workbook home, and I would learn these skills while I was home. I'd put my daughter to bed, and I was trying for the life of me to figure out how to automate this thing that was taking hours and hours of a smart person's time to produce this shipping schedule was the output of this multiple times a day. And so at the end of this whole thing, we ended up getting it from hours down to minutes, which I was super proud of.
So cool.
It was really cool. But also the moral of that story was, as the person who, again, not special, but I was the person at the time closest to the problem. Mm-hmm. So the moral of this for me was the person closest to the problem understands it best, virtually never has the tools in the tool belt to fix the problem, and definitely never has the authority to do it.
Yeah.
And so that was the way of old. So, that was a particularly memorable moment for me to realize that technology was the answer, right, to automating all these shipping problems that I was dealing with. And I was going to have to learn to master the tools that were available to me and make a really good case to get new tools. And over time, we did, much even better than that. But that was a story that still sticks out to me to this day.
That is so cool. And I love it because really, we hear about AI so much. We're constantly hearing about all the new technology going on. And really, it's all about automation in the end. It's about making what we do faster and easier on us humans, and not wasting so much time. That's really the basic way of saying it. So that's really cool. I love that. I want to ask, what would your ideal warehouse look like today? Let's say that you could wave a magic wand, and what would it look like? How would it function?
So I probably have to start with one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
Which is that there is no ideal warehouse.
No, he's like the politician.
Right. Well, no, you will find a long list of people, smart people, consultants who will come and tell you that this one solution is the panacea to all your problems.
Okay.
And it's not.
Yeah.
Right? The same solution that works really well for commoditized CPG is not the same solution that's going to work really well for very fragile one-off niche items, which is not the same solution that's going to work for the healthcare vertical. Right? So I guess if I was to...
I'm going to pause you.
Sure.
Mega point there from Kevin. Your warehouse does not need to look identical to somebody else's warehouse. In fact, it shouldn't necessarily.
Right.
Right? You have your own unique needs and your own unique issues. So anyway, that was such a killer point. I want to make sure we didn't miss it. So sorry, back to you, Kevin.
Thanks. So balancing that with the fact that there are often best practices that you should open your eyes and be aware of, I would say my ideal warehouse is highly automated, I guess, at least for the majority of the CPG industry. It's going to be automated. Now, depending on your size and your scale, and whether or not you're working with a green field or a brown field, which is, I think, another key point to consider. But in the modern days, we can automate a brownfield facility. Once upon a time, you had to shut down your entire operations, buy a new building, build a new building. Those were your only options. Now you have all these very clever, for example, goods-to-person systems that can operate in a brownfield zone. Again, shipping software automation, you have all these opportunities to automate things that already exist today. So I would probably have something that's balancing your needs to be flexible with your needs to be automated, because we are, at the end of the day, all competing in this age of Amazon and people and their, impatient delivery expectations. So if you were going to recommend, what area in the warehouse, where is automation most important? I mean, maybe it's important everywhere, but where would you recommend starting, finishing?
automation in the warehouse?
I clearly have a bias, Lori, but that's
Okay.
hopefully okay. I strongly believe that the biggest bang for your buck is going to be with automating your shipping process for two
Okay.
reasons. One, in spite of my past experience and my desire not to believe this, your shipping costs are going to eat almost all of your other costs, bar none. So you're going to get a much bigger return on your time and technology investment. The second is back to one of my hot takes, which is taking your delivery promise seriously. And so your shipping part of your process is your last opportunity to touch your customer before you let that package out into the universe to fly on its own and put it in the hands of whomever your elected carrier is. So I would absolutely start with shipping first. And it's not that difficult to get started because,
Okay.
again, if you diligently look towards the experience you're trying to give to your customers and you start ruthlessly documenting and making these business decisions that have historically been left to this institutional knowledge, when you put that in front of either a savvy consultant that you're working with to implement new software or leveraging the tools that you already have in the software that you own today, you can start seeing some real returns on some of that investment.
So what kind of tools do you recommend are best for automating the shipping in the warehouse? What types of things would you want in your tech stack?
Sure. So cloud first, 100%.
Cloud first.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a basket full of horror stories from some of these, big routing table things and
Yes.
these on-prem solutions not going well. Stories of customers getting free next day air shipping after Christmas, which is
Yes.
not great, I can promise you, for the bottom line. So, cloud first technology that puts some of that power
Yeah.
and automation in the hands of the business and not always having to have so many handshakes, which is where a lot of that entropy will tend to occur.
Okay, cloud first.
yeah.
Love that. I had to share this little story. It's so silly, but I had some accountant friends during COVID, and accountancy seems like outside of our realm, but they didn't have cloud like anything. They were so used to on-prem everything and being in the office that they were literally shipping their filing cabinets from house to house, which was so weird to me. But yeah, that just reminded me it's so important in today's day and age that everything can be accessed on the cloud. I love that. So.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a hopefully soon dying misnomer that on-prem software is more reliable. And so, you have to send tapes in the old days off-site to be backed up. And so with modern cloud-first software, you can have multiple availability regions where in the event, a plane crashes in Ohio data center, you're, minutes away from being up in another region.
Yes.
That's not as viable with older technology.
Yes, absolutely.
The second thing is giving people intelligent levels of configurability. Now, I'm not going to say I have a crusade against customization, but what I do have a crusade against is people being stuck in old customized branches and not being able to take advantage of the latest investments made by their software provider.
Okay.
And so giving them configurability and giving them guardrails so they have enough power to, to get their business objectives satisfied without giving them so much power that they, we like to say, help the customer fall into the pit of success.
Okay.
So giving them guided configurability is largely how you do that. And then, last is
why would people not want? I mean, I guess what arguments do you hear that they're like, I just need so much customization? Well, why would people argue against that?
almost every single time the answer to we want customization and not configuration is a lack of defined requirements. So when you really press on this, another tool in the lean, leader's toolbox is the 5 whys. So you say, well, why do you need that? And you ask a few more whys, and I've yet to hear an answer other than, well, we're not sure right now, but we want to know it's there for the future.
They're just sort of hedging their bets.
They're hedging their bets.
So maybe you need to, if you are guilty of it, maybe you need to look and see, have you solidified what your requirements really are? Do you not know? And what if they do say if you're hedging your bets? Is it still possible if you're limiting that scope to, what if something comes up?
Yeah, and honestly, these days, configuration versus customization is almost semantic. The things we can do today with configuration are things you honestly couldn't dream of doing with customization even a few years ago.
I totally agree with that.
So yeah, again, that part of that argument is largely semantic, and some of it's just relic practices from days gone by. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents on that topic.
That's the whole story. I always would cook baked potatoes, and I always poked holes in them with my fork. My kids are like, "Why do we do that?" And I was like, "I don't know. My mom does it.
Oh, yeah, that's the way we've always done it. That's my
That's the way we
that's my
always
most favorite
did it.
thing to
I
hear.
don't know why. But yeah, sometimes there's a reason. And I know potatoes can explode. We looked it up. But sometimes there's not a good reason. And we're just doing it because that's
So
just what you've always done.
Are potatoes classified hazmat then?
I think so.
No, I feel like I'm learning something
We
here.
just had this discussion because a couple weeks ago for Sunday dinner, our potatoes exploded because I didn't punch the holes. So anyway, so third thing.
So this is where things might get contentious.
Okay. I'm ready. Ready to fight.
You've got to sometimes take a step back and listen to what your software provider is advising you, because they do this for a living and they work with hundreds or thousands of customers. And so I have a lot of my own stories from my past life where they may have had a better way of doing it. And, we didn't take the time to take a look and see if there really was a best practice baked in there that we might be able to take advantage of. Now, in spite of what I tell my wife and my friends, I don't actually have all the answers to the world's problems. But it's worth taking a look at. It's worth taking a pause and saying, yes, this is the way we do it. But our software provider is doing it this way for a reason. So we should at least explore that with them. And, you have to go down that mutual journey of learning, because there may be an instance where there is a better way of doing it. If you remain curious, you may be able to land there in a much better state. Conversely, your software provider may learn something. We learn new things all the time.
Yeah.
And so we implement changes based on feedback we get from our customers literally daily. So it is a mutual journey of learning. But the last one, like I said, is that you do have to have an open mind. And that is way harder than it sounds.
Yeah, it really is. And it kind of actually is in conflict in a way with our original point of your warehouse may need to look different than everyone else. So,
Right.
You may be saying, hey, but wait a minute, Kevin, I have unique needs. There's a reason I do this. So I guess what is your answer to that? How do you meld the two in a happy way?
Yeah, it's like driving your car down a road. You have lanes, but you also have guardrails. And so I'm not going to say that there's never a time that you're going to need to go outside those guardrails, but not all software is for all people. And any responsible company will tell you that. They will decline to sell you their product if it's not a great fit for you. I mean, we do that all the time. But odds are, more often than not, you can live within those guardrails.
Okay, awesome. You could do it. In the new cars, they've got all the little buzzy things that are like warning you when you're going in the other lane.
Or driving for you.
Or driving for you.
Yeah.
I know, exactly. So, sometimes it's better to be in a different lane. Sometimes you stay in the guardrails. So we also have businesses maybe that are smaller warehouse. I guess one of the things I get is people say, oh, automation in the warehouse. If I start automating, it's really, really expensive. And I'd rather use my Excel files, or I'd rather use my whatever it is. What are, I guess, some affordable ways that you would recommend that people can still take advantage of automation, still lower that amount of time that they're spending compared to the time that they're, using on it?
Sure. So some of the answers are simple, and we've covered them already. Gone are the days where you need to have a server room and people managing those things for you. So cloud-based software is inherently, in many cases, more affordable. Awesome. You don't have to often make these giant capital outlays like you used to.
Yeah.
There are also, lots of different pieces of hardware you can use. It's shocking the number of companies don't even use simple things like wedge scanners.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
At the heart of what we've been doing as a supply chain industry for 1 million years now is barcoding. The number of people that don't use barcodes today is shocking to me. Now, I'm not talking about the people that seek to graduate from barcodes to more advanced technology like RFID or optical recognition. I'm talking about basic 1D barcodes.
That's crazy.
Barcode your inventory.
Yeah.
Buy a wedge scanner.
Yeah.
Right? Those things are simple. There are certainly more advanced things that you can take advantage of, but even the more advanced robotics these days, they're becoming more and more approachable. And so they're becoming more accessible to the mid-market. We have a long list of customers that have implemented an impressive amount of robotic type automation in their warehouses.
Yeah, really cool. And there are fully automated warehouses these days. I mean,
Lights
you can go
out.
all the way to there's nobody there except the robots. So I think there's definitely a way to do it gradually. Definitely a way to do it within your comfort zone of whoever you are and whatever stage you're at. I think for me, the goal would be simply to continue to do something new, to add new abilities wherever you see those opportunities. So
Yep.
I would love, we don't have a ton more time, but I would love to hear about your visions of the future.
Sure.
Where do you see warehouse automation going? And if you get this all right and you like dream some amazing thing up, we'll save this clip forever and then we'll show it and you can be known around the world as
The $1 billion harbinger. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I mean, it is a $1 billion question. Where is the future going?
Yeah.
But there certainly are emerging technologies that I pay more attention to because I think they're very relevant to the shipping space. So I think it's time to accept. But again, transportation costs drive so much of this.
So much.
And one of the things that I'm keeping my eye on are the incredibly innovative ways that companies are changing the way that they're doing deliveries.
Okay.
Amazon, for example, is taking their drones into and out of, one of the things we're not talking about is they're exiting certain markets with their drone deliveries.
Yeah.
Even down the road from where our US East office is located, I've seen in the Embry-Riddle campus area, there are autonomous mobile robots driving around on the sidewalk doing deliveries.
Yep.
We're talking about an age where, vehicles can drive on the roads, autonomously. I mean, imagine that, the hit the trucking industry has taken with, it's an ethical hit, but it has been a hit nonetheless. Back in the 1930s, they implemented these hours of service rules and they've evolved over time. But imagine a world where you have a self-driving truck that doesn't need to report hours of service.
Yeah.
And,
incredible.
Again, the rules have been around a long time, but, now that people are reporting these things digitally, it's being a lot more closely enforced.
I think it makes a lot of sense too, because the labor issue in the industry is so tough. It's a constant struggle. Every year it feels like labor challenges are some of the top things facing warehouses and those in the industry. So, being able to have the labor that we get and the labor that we have access to doing high level jobs, doing more fulfilling jobs where we get rid of some of that, more mindless stuff. So I love that. Okay. What else do you see in the future?
Yeah. So, technology's flattening, and I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing every single person come on this podcast and talk about data. And data.
Go.
But most importantly, we've had data for a long time, but data has lived in these various silos. Your data has only been available. Your ERP data was only available in your ERP or your accounting system, right? Your WMS, your warehouse data was only available in your warehouse management system. Likewise, your shipping data only available there. So we're seeing largely a democratization of data across these different systems. And so customers
wait. Help me understand. A democratization of the data. What does that mean in Lori Boyer level?
Yeah. So again, once upon a time, no one was talking to each other. Everyone held their data really tightly.
I see what you're saying.
Now, we as a shipping software provider, we can get access to all this data that the carrier is providing for the benefit of our customer and for the benefit of our customer's customer, right? We have warehouse management data that we can look at, and all of that matters because now you can, for the first time in, almost ever, you can look at the whole end-to-end life cycle from the time that someone clicks buy now to the time that it's delivered to them and the experience they've had along the way.
Yes.
You can look even farther upstream. You can look at your demand planning activities. You can look at where your inventory is coming from overseas. And so, one of the things, it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't use the AI.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Of course.
That acronym's okay. Right? So, I mean, I, like most people, are certainly very bullish on that topic. But one of the things I think has been kind of overlooked with the advent of the more, I would say, consumer approachable AI, which is these large language models, is, the previous darling of the supply chain world, which is machine learning.
Yeah, right.
So we are, we exist in an industry where we have the benefit and the bane of being a very well-studied industry.
Yes.
You have entire career tracks and educational tracks that do nothing but study this space. So we have the data, we have the models, we have the academic people that can go out and do things with it. So these models can be improved over time by implementing things like machine learning to predict all sorts of things that you need to know about. And so you take that, and now you mash that with some of the more, more recent technology. And I won't give away too many of the exciting things that we're doing, but we're not far off from a world where you can, using natural language, you can ask for a meaningful analysis of your data that's action oriented. No longer do you need people that are able to be, data jockeys, so to speak. So those types of things can influence your entire supply chain. It can influence where your fulfillment nodes are located. It can influence what carriers you choose. It can implement how you staff your warehouse, what technology you buy for that matter.
I think I love, because what I'm hearing from you is an answer to what I get a lot from our community and the people out there, is that we suffer right now from data overload, where we just have so much data and we don't know how to make it simple. And what I'm hearing you say is you see in the future, as that data is communicating more and we're actually making it really usable and in a way that simplifies what we're doing and streamlines what's going on instead of just,
Well, you're describing the difference between data and information.
oh dear, data and information.
Right? Data is noise, and it's turned into information by someone who can deal with it.
Absolutely.
And so those people are rare. So organizations all across the world, most people in the space have lived through and died through at least one or two data projects in their life. But you get through this project and you realize that you don't have anyone that can do things with the data.
Yes.
Right? So you can't act on that information. But now you factor in these new technologies, and that data becomes information, and it becomes more, more approachable.
That's so cool. I love that. It's so exciting. That makes me geek out. I'm excited about the future. Anything else for the future that you see?
Yeah. So if we want to talk about challenges that are coming in the future, I think that that's one of the things that our customers, joint customers too, need to be aware of is I think there's some really obvious market pressures out there that are going to cause some people to think that it's a good idea that they might want to offshore, or in some way outsource some of their fulfillment. And for some, it makes sense. But for many, it may not make sense to lose control of your delivery experience because, that's key to your brand. So you'll see a lot of alarming data points out there. A lot of these are just smoke, though. So, you see one data point that says, industrial vacancies at 5.2%, and it's the lowest rate or the highest rate since 2020. But the thing they leave out is that it's still, still lower than the 15-year average.
Yes.
Right. So some of these things I think are, clickbaity headline things. But everyone knows what's going on with the freight market being in free fall. So there are a lot of these pressures for these other organizations to come knocking and say, hey, let me take ownership of your fulfillment operations. And again, for some subset, that may be okay. But for many, you're losing control of your delivery experience. And if you don't take ownership of your delivery experience and you don't take on that journey of automating that delivery experience, you're at the behest of someone else. And so I think that that's going to be one of the biggest challenges we see in the coming years.
Yes.
Also, not to mention geopolitical concerns, tariff wars.
Yes.
Look at some of the very clever things the likes of like the Shein brands of the world are doing with avoiding some duties.
Yep.
So, the world is changing rapidly around us.
Yes.
And so, owning it and deploying technology that can let you keep up with the pace of change is super important.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any good examples of companies that you feel like are innovative or taking steps that people can look towards?
Yeah, so we have a long list of them, and it impresses me. I think the most exciting time is right now, and I think the most exciting place to be is the mid-market because these customers,
shout out to you guys,
right? These customers have grown to a state where they are sophisticated and they have the capital to take on some of these projects. They're not worried about the cost of capital and borrowing money right now because they have it. Right. And they're also savvy enough, and most importantly, they're nimble enough to do it. They don't have to rely on multi-year long steering committee freeze ups to make these things happen. So one of our customers, for example, with a very large automated storage and retrieval system that I won't name by brand, but they went from idea inception to fully implemented in a brownfield site, by the way. And this is a very, very large piece of automation in a warehouse.
Okay.
They went live inside of 12 months.
Wow.
And it was because...
That's amazing.
Yeah, they were curious and they were committed.
That's awesome. So shout out to innovative companies out there looking to embrace automation. We are out of time, sadly, but I have been so glad to have you here. This is an exciting, fun industry to be in, and I feel like it's just a fun time with all of the cool new advances. So thank you, Kevin, for walking us through that. Kevin, do you want to say goodbye? Any final thoughts or any way people can get in contact with you? Or are you on LinkedIn or something if they wanted to connect with you?
I am on LinkedIn and probably embarrassingly inactive by comparison to some of your other guests, but I'm always happy to talk shop. I love talking about this industry. This is what I do. So yeah, you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to spark up a conversation on any and all things that are exciting to any of you. And if you have any need for the types of problems that RF Smart solves for customers out there in the world, we'd love to chat with you. We're very passionate about what we say is transforming customers and changing lives. And I think we live that mission quite well. So
awesome.
I look forward to hearing from anyone who's opens up the can of worms and talking supply chain with me.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And we'll see you all next time.